Perhaps it should be pointed out that although we say the secular world as if it were the world, it's not a great percentage of people that trust there is no God at all. And even those that do so, if you like, trust that there is no God at all, under severe difficulties, the battlefield, or, well, bereavement, may wistfully hope that, Granny has gone to heaven, that they will see their wife again, that there is another domain, an existence beyond the physical in which one can continue what really matters in life, especially the things that you value, the relationships that have ended because of death, say, and a hope that in some way there's a possibility of an after state, not full of pain and loss and uncertainty, but that which you value. Even the very crude understanding of such as in answering the question, do you trust that there's a God, or do you believe that there's a God, which is not the same as do you know there's a God, but do you live in the hope that there is a God to the extent that you would say, yes, I do believe there is God, as opposed to, no, I don't believe there's any such thing as God. And then, of course, there's those like the Buddhists who aren't particularly a member of religion, but believe in the spirit world. We might now think of as New Age, but they've been beliefs that have been with us for thousands of years, that there are spirit beings, and perhaps they're hostile, perhaps they're friendly, and it would be lovely if there were fairies at the bottom of the garden, and people that trust that there are other beings, just as strangely there are people who trust also that there are aliens from other planets that visit with great technology and may exist, and may be friendly, may be helpful, but fear also that they may not be. And this sort of effect on one's life is rather similar to thinking that there may be a God and wondering whether he's friendly or not. And of course many of the religions end up with a God that's not friendly to those that don't conform to the society that you're in. And therefore you have a concern, worry about such, rather than a hope and a joy and an assurance of such. There are requirements. Did you meet the list of commandments sort of thing? Have you been weighed in the balance, as in the Egyptian understanding of things? And indeed, not just the Egyptian, but civilizations more generally, I think, historically speaking, have thought this. And it may well be because of the pressure of the state to have conformity and develop a religion accordingly. But this still a very large number of people that, if you say, well, do you believe there is some sort of God? They say yes. Or they say no, but then would say that they do believe there are strange things like ghosts and spirits and well, spiritual type beings, in fact, and still wonder if we are fundamentally such rather than physical. So although we refer to the secular world, it's not well, it's dominant in that it's structured, especially into some modern states. They claim to not follow a religion. And they may also claim that there's no aliens visiting our planet, say, and affecting us. And may simply not, governments and so on, not give credence to education that would suggest that you live after death. So its medical practice, including its mental illness understanding of things, dismisses some beliefs as a mental device to try and compensate for the difficulties of life, but a mental device that is in some sense unrealistic and is an illness you need to be rescued from. So you may have a state that is basically like that, but of people who, from the state's point of view, are still superstitious. They believe in the non-material, which the state seems to present as not helpful to being a good citizen. So it tends to alienate the view of such views, and people that hold them are, in some sense, foolish or basic, primitive compared to what a really sophisticated modern person needs to be successful and get on in life and be a good citizen. And the media, therefore, may be what we call a secular, generally playing down support of religious or spiritual things and playing up secular events and state celebrations that don't have anything to do with the spiritual side of the beliefs of perhaps much of the population. So we feel we're living in a secular world, even though the bulk of its people have admittedly not a uniform belief, not necessarily following one religion, or even any religion, but nonetheless holding a view that there is a spiritual, there is a possibility of a God. They do pray, especially when things are difficult, and probably feel guilty that they haven't prayed for a long time. And I think it's because they feel a need for God to exist. In particular, when things are extremely difficult and they cry out to, you could say, clutching at straws. Or you could just say in desperation, so that a person who is outwardly very modern and materialistic, in great unhappiness and difficulty, may well turn to God and remember that perhaps their parents did, or some relative or friend, and who knows, we'll try that if it works, And because many difficulties pass, including illnesses, the body repairs itself in 90% of the cases of difficulties, so to speak. They feel confirmed in this, regardless of the absence of religion in the formal world, the work world, and perhaps the media world. The news they follow, the programs they listen to. There may even be a ridicule of religion and so on. But even that keeps it in mind, such that when you're desperate, you might just pray very earnestly in case there is a God. And you get the sort of secular type response to difficulty of, well, if you are there, God, show yourself. Heal me. And 5 days later I found I was considerably better, and the doctors said, well, it's unusual, but the body does repair itself sometimes. It's amazing, really, wonderfully made we are. Well, not made, developed. The doctor doesn't tend to give too much outward credence to spiritual things and God. But you feel that in some sense there was an answer to prayer, and you're just glad. You may not be expressing it greatly and, falling at the altar and thanking God for it profusely. But you know that in great difficulty you would pray again and hope that you get a similar result. Do you see? Spiritual life is not necessarily a religious life. But if pushed, do you believe in God or not? Tick the boxes accordingly. They tick yes. Am I Christian? Oh, I'm not sure. And even the other way around, yes, I do tick Christianity, but I'm not that sold on it. I'm not a religious fanatic, but yes, I believe God exists, and from a sort of Christian point of view, as I understand it. Do you see, there's lies, damned lies, and statistics where the fact that 60% of the population or 70% might still say they believe in God doesn't mean they pray every day by any means, or even attend some temple or church. So the more secular can say, you see, we're an unbelieving society. And in fact, the most fanatically religious would say we're an unbelieving society because they don't believe as earnestly as us and, keep the commandments, say, or do what Jesus said, according to my Christian religion anyway, which is pray for the king, apparently. Pray for our ministers, and that's what the church minister said at church on Sunday. They're not necessarily that. So, why am I going through this? I think because I'm saying that we classify our society according to our data and statistics and so on, and get happy or gloomy, confirmed or disillusioned by such. But the figures are not, well, sometimes deliberately phony, but are misleading to say the least. There's so many shades of grey between 100%, devotion to God and there's no such thing as anything that isn't material, which of course is an absurd belief, isn't it, if you think about it, because feelings are not material. You can't measure them, weigh them, stretch them, show them physically, but they're terribly important. If you're struck by grief or by joy, your world is completely different, and it's most important whether you're in joy or grief or wretched or happy. Vitally important to everything you do and your state of mind and so forth. So a materialist in the extreme is somewhere between frightening and not human. And a religious person in the extreme is a nightmare to live with and deal with. Because he's controlled by typically a rule book that doesn't allow for humanity and needs and constrains people to be something they're not, and something that's not what they need, which is to practice their values earnestly and adjust them according to their experience of such and learning. So you need a freedom to learn and a freedom to act. And certainly you find there are consequences that are good or bad, and you adjust your beliefs accordingly. And then I feel life has provided what was necessary, as opposed to what was imposed upon us by organizations which are not human. They're made up of people, but it's a group of people that changes and can't be held responsible because the ones that made those laws are dead now anyway, and who knows why they made them, but they're on the statute books, so they're still there controlling our life until we change them for the better, and we can't because the rules don't let us, because our voting system or our medical system or our economic or our political system we've inherited is constructed now the way it is. And we're trapped in a world that allows us not the freedom that we need, but in some sense the lack of freedom that we're constrained to have. Am I an anarchist then? Well, no, I'm just saying that you need to love your God that personifies what you truly value. And what we truly value is pretty common to most of us. We value life, or we don't live long. We value health. We put ourselves first, else we don't stay in this world long. If you sacrifice your life to the poor, you become so desperately poor in some societies that you have a short life with them and die of starvation and illness and poverty. So we are endowed with a narrow sense of self to the extent that it keeps us more or less in life, which allows us to learn the lessons that we can practice, namely the practice of what we truly value at heart, rather than what we're constrained to value by imposed belief systems, be they of the state or the church or our culture or whatever. I've talked myself out. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.